This is Future Sense Now, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. Future Sense Now is brought to you by the Futures Forum. Stay tuned for a journey to the futures of women with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to Future Sense Now, an online e-zine of the Futures Forum. It is March 2018, another Women's History Month, and we continue our exploration on the future history of women. We're voicing Herstory, Women 2030 and Beyond. Now, 2030, as we all know, is a poll year, Agenda 2030, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, SDG 5, which speaks specifically to the development and inclusion of women. In 2017, the women's movement seemed to have gotten a little bit of lift as women around the world marched to protest the new narrative being embodied by Trumpism, and the hashtag #MeToo movement and other movements have seemed to begin to flourish all over again. Women futurists in a recent trend report speak to this growing trend of women running for elected office around the world, starting their own businesses and starting their own organizations. But in this particular segment, I am going to be speaking to Amy Karle. She's an artist, designer, and futurist. In fact, she is an internationally award-winning bio-artist. Now, let's explain that. Her work can be seen as an artifact of a speculative future where digital, physical, and biological systems merge. I hope this is not going to happen by 2030, but we'll see. She leverages body-based investigation, science, and technology to create art that catalytically examines material and spiritual aspects of life. Her artwork taps our concept of what it means to be human. And in this body of work, expressing representations of our internal processes as visual forms. I'm going to stop there and bring her in. So welcome, Amy Karle. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Now, we're talking about the UN SDG goals, which sounds like a lot of data, but it really is about reimagining what human life ought to be in 2030. So when you hear this lofty goal that the UN and SDG states will resolve by 2030, which is not very far away, to end poverty and hunger everywhere, to combat inequalities within and among countries, to build peaceful and just societies, and to promote gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. How, as an artist, do you respond to that statement?
Well, it's not just as an artist, it's just first and foremost as a human. This statement is very touching, and I think that these goals are really beautiful and lofty ideals that I hope that we can reach. I also know that we have a lot of systems in place that make it difficult to reach some of these goals. But I feel like I'm doing what I can to help work towards those goals. And when we're working together, we can start to make those changes and come to those. Even if we can't reach the totality of every single person being fed, every single woman being empowered, I think we can definitely initiate change and start to swing towards those areas. But we're going to have to each play our own role, and we're going to have to do it together. So as an artist, the way that I view those goals is by exploring these topics through my work and actually practicing that. So a lot of my work has to do with self-empowerment and learning that we can change how we go through this world and a lot of our own experiences.
Well, one of the things that interests me in this question as we talk about women and the future of women and this idea, as your work says, is to explore what it means to be human. Now, gender, of course, this differentiation of gender between male and female, and now we have people crossing genders, is a very new phenomenon in human history. How does your work attempt, or does your work, I should say, attempt to represent a gendered future, or does it see the future as more or less ungendered, non-gendered, what is the word, agendered, what is it?
So for me, my work is not so much about gender as it is about identity. and
Ah,
and finding how we represent our come to terms with our internal identities matching up with our external identities, how we live through our bodies, what is going on with our bodies, how we appear in the world. So I actually would argue that the notion of gender is a modern notion, and a lot of people have been on many parts of the spectrum for a long history of male to female, and people express that differently. Some it's more like in attitude. Others, it's more in what we classify as a certain gender through body parts. But a lot of this for me came from being born with a life-threatening birth defect, and having to live through this birth defect and feel like I, first of all, wanted to heal and enhance the body so I can match my internal states. I wanted to go out and do things with other kids and play with them. And so first, I'm concerned about healing and enhancing the body, fixing that medically. But then there's also this element of the human condition of feeling limited by the constraints of the body and the outside body, and not matching up with the internal identity of who we want to be and who do we want to become. So how do we find freedom within the constraints of the body? And I feel like this is an element of the human condition, and being able to empower ourselves in that way is almost like a spiritual search.
well, I really wanted to explore more what you mean when you say where digital, physical, and biological systems merge. Because if we're talking about creating a future, a lot of the images of people imagining a speculative future where digital, physical, and biological systems merge have been dystopian images. Terminator is what comes to mind for me, and they tend to be dark. So I kind of get nervous, when the transhumanist movement talks about the future, and when we hear about the future of work, for example, and AI and the singularity, it becomes very frightening. How do you think your art can better help us explore this question? And do you think your being a woman makes a difference in how you explore this? In other words, if a man were using the same technologies you were using, would the art be different? Am I making sense?
Yes. So I hear a lot of questions, and I want to answer them all. They're all awesome.
I'm sorry. Okay,
you're a really great interviewer. They're all great questions. Okay, so let's. I'm going to go backwards from what I remember first. First of all, the issue of being a woman. Yes, I think definitely being a woman plays into how I explore the body, how I explore using technology, and from a meta view, just some of the sensitivities that I have, the positions that I've been put in, make me look at the world in a certain way. So yeah, part of it has to do with being a woman, but part of it also is just, that's who I am as an individual as well. But then let me answer the bigger question. So first you were talking about these dystopian futures that are often painted in the movies and in some books. To me, we see these different futures being painted for us. Some are very dystopian and can lead us to our demise. And we're actually seeing some of that in the real world too, with, different countries hacking other people's election systems and power grids, and, a cyber warfare going on that a lot of the public isn't even aware of. So there is that scary dystopian future. But there's this other end of the spectrum too, where we can see how our technologies could lead to this kind of enlightened singularity that's painted for us. Now, where I tend to look at that is more of a realistic term of how our technologies are being used, like to heal and enhance us on a medical plane, to enhance some of our educational systems, the deliverance of information to a lot of different people that couldn't otherwise access it. I think that, the technology in itself can be used towards different means. It's like money that way. It's really like, who's behind it? How are we using it? So for me, I want to use our technology for our best and highest good. That's it, for a very positive future. So.
Well, I want to certainly be able to show some of our listeners some of your artwork, so you can explain something. So maybe you can describe one that I'm going to use as a picture at some point on a website or something that will talk about this idea of digital, physical, and biological systems merging.
Okay, so yeah, let me back up for that and explain that a little bit, and then I'll give you some pieces that match with that. the point that we're at in human evolution right now is humans and technology merging. And if you look at how much that we use our cell phone in a day, how much we use our computers in a day, you can kind of see how we are disembodying some of the things that humans normally do into our technology. And we're using them as devices to help us do what humans already do. So we're using them as tools, and humans have always used tools since the dawn of time to help them do these things.
Yes.
But now we're kind of getting to a point where we're going to start merging this into our bodies even more. And we are seeing that in medical ways, like when we see, diabetic control with wearables and implants or pacemakers. And we're not looking at this person in front of us as some RoboCop. We're looking at them, or Terminator, we're looking at them as a life that gets to continue to live and has more hope because of our technology. But again, we can use this towards, to our best and highest good, or towards our demise. It's kind of how we use it. So the way that I'm exploring this, one example is my Peace Regenerative Reliquary. This is scaffolds for stem cell growth into bone. And what I'm exploring here is both material and biomedical aspects, as well as some spiritual aspects of what does it mean to be alive.
Yeah.
So the piece, technically, I'm looking at how could we make implants for the body. In this case, I'm using bone that we can donate to ourselves and then put back into our bodies with a low risk of rejection. And the way that I was able to embark on that process was by 3D printing scaffolds in a shape that triggers stem cells to become bone cells. We can make it a certain size. So if a patient needed to replace a cheekbone, we can scan this side, make a model of it, and then grow a piece of bone for this size. There's a lot of medical benefits to this.
Wow.
But as an artist, I'm more exploring how can we combine disciplines to start to think on a different scale of how we heal and enhance the body. How can we work together across disciplines to enhance us? And then my artwork was never meant to be put back in the body. So if we're not going to be implanting into the body, this raises interesting questions about what is smart to grow outside of the body, and what does it mean to be alive if our cells are growing outside of the body, but they're not in us and they're scientifically alive, but we don't look at that and say this is a human in front of us. Wow. So it starts to raise really interesting questions about this future where biotech and infotech merges. And fundamentally, though, it still questions, what does it mean to be alive? It asks questions about the mystery of life and who we are, why we're here. What does it mean to be alive?
Do you think, as I'm hearing this, I'm thinking to myself, but how can any of this contribute to our thrival? I really like the idea of the fact that from a healthcare perspective, your works could certainly begin to inform, and there's so many people, not just women, obviously, that need support from a healthcare perspective of rebuilding, maybe lost tissue or lost bone or whatever that your work is going to be looking at. But as you think about a larger picture of women and the issue about, for example, are we moving towards a society with more partnerships, or are we going to have more backlash, or are we going to have better quality of life? How does your work as an artist, and I should say you're also co-founder of something called Conceptual Art Technologies, which has registered IP, which is very important, patents, service marks, and trademarks, and was an artist in residence at Autodesk. So that's very technical. It's very much, Autodesk and those systems are very much about traditional business. Would you say you're being a woman artist in these spaces is bringing a new sensitivity? We've all heard accusations about the fact that AI is not unbiased. There's bias based on the people who are programming it.
Totally.
Your viewpoint of bringing this question about the spirituality of the user helps to perhaps do what law and policy is not now doing for us? Do you think that you are able to make that difference?
I hope so. I think I'm able to make that difference in one small way, in one small person. But if we have enough people making their own difference, this is where things start to change. So I'm really concerned with some of the numbers. I actually didn't really start thinking about women's empowerment consciously until a few years ago. And I think that was actually a defense mechanism, because if I looked at some of the numbers, I'd probably be dissuaded. You know, I'm in the art world, I'm in the tech industry, and I'm an entrepreneur. So women entrepreneurs, the stats say that only 5% of women own startups. And I don't even know if that means successful, thriving startups, what level of funding they're in, if they're actually making a profit or what. The tech segment, the last stats I saw were that only 25% are women. But if you go to the Google campus at lunch, it looks like more like 1 in 12 or 1 in 15 women, not even 25%. And then in the art field, supposedly 51% of women, 51% of artists are women. But if we look at the top tiers of who's showing the museums and the galleries, that is such a small percentile. It's only like 2 to 3% women. So all these stats seem like really discouraging in a way. But in order to start changing some of these viewpoints and changing what's accessible in our technology, in our businesses, in our you know, in the art world, and what we see is these images that are informing us, it takes a lot of different kinds of voices. So I think that I'm very thankful to be one of those voices and push through regardless of what the data says, and keep trying to make a difference. So yes, I fundamentally believe that anyone contributing to the work ultimately shapes the outcome. And those images and technologies that we see and that we use affect how we perceive the future, and therefore who we become, because these are the visions that are outlined before us.
It's interesting you would say that you didn't start thinking about women's empowerment until a couple of years ago, because I would say I tend to agree with that. I didn't really think about women's agenda issues per se until I started this conversation in the future history of women, which is interesting. I mean, I'm a woman as an engineer. I've always been in a minority space, so I'm used to being the odd one out. So perhaps, as you're right, if I started thinking about the numbers, that I've been too panicked, I've been too panicked and distraught and distressed to survive just being in the space. That was enough trauma. So I didn't.
Well, I think, you know, that's where the discussion really is like, what are we doing as individuals to kind of overcome? What are we doing to continue in that space and to thrive in that space? And those are conversations that I wasn't having. I was just practicing. I was just trying to get through and trying to get by, as I know, like it sounds like you are from some of your stories too. And there's a lot more work I find to be done in, you know, in empowerment that way, and in educating and standing up for yourself. A lot of times there's more work done in that space than there is on the actual work itself.
Well, that's true. Well, now you certainly have certain major markers of women artists. You have been named one of the most influential women in 3D printing, very technical field. You also have been winner of the UFAB Global Creative Award, which was just earlier this year. And very interestingly, you've been artist envoy to Poland, tasked with women's empowerment to the American Arts Incubator. Now, all of this in between, since you've started your business, you've done 53 international exhibitions. Your work has been seen in Austria, Sao Paulo, Brazil. Your work has been in such prestigious organizations such as Vogue and Fast Company. So you really are Scientific American. Talk about a breadth. So I really am interested in this idea of the role of the artist in helping to shape our shared vision of the future. So as you think about the spaces in which you are, what global challenge would you say that you might be willing to tackle as a solo art show? In other words, if you could say, okay, there are all these challenges in the world, and I want to do an art show that would probably speak to this challenge, which one would you think you would want to tackle? Health, women, inequality, water, ocean?
Well, I think it's in these kind of balances of power. So, you know, how do we use, and empowerment. So how do we use our technology to empower us as humans instead of having it take us over? And this is from an individual scale with enhancing our bodies. This is a political issue. It's a global issue. That functions on many planes. So it really would be in the realm of empowerment. And that's not just women's empowerment. It's also like an empowerment of employees and employers, and how we use our technology in governmental associations as well.
But do you think, given the current power structure, that actually technology that you're creating may actually be used also for a negative purpose? Because you're also creating new forms that don't exist. I mean, you're creating new ideas. Do you think someone could see your work and go, oh my God, I could use this for something negative? Do you think that's possible?
This is always a concern, right? Artists and scientists, I think, often share that concern. Here we are, I'm trying to work for good. But like I said, technology is ultimately how somebody uses it and towards what means. So yeah, there's a lot of technology that could be used towards negative means, but I think this is where it gets very interesting and important to be an artist and paint this picture of the speculative future and really contemplate philosophically, who do we want to become? What values do we want to embody individually and as a society? So I'm a visual learner. And I know a lot of people are visual learners. And if we can paint a picture or paint an image, this helps create what people envision and therefore work towards and become. So my artwork tries to ask questions of really fundamentally focusing on how to empower ourselves, and asking those questions in a removed context. Like I said, I'm not implanting this back into the body. I'm asking questions about doing that. So I'm trying to raise our awareness of it before it actually happens. So we can say, we're going to choose to use this in a way that helps us. If we can think through it far enough, then we could use it for our positive means. But of course, people can use that towards whatever ends they.
Well, as you rightly say, yeah. So tell me then, looking at 2030 and the future history of women in particular, even though you're working, just on women's bodies or women's spirituality or women's issues, but looking at the future history of women, is there one potential headline which is optimistic, which we can look at for Amy Karle's artwork in 2030? To have allowed to emerge? What would that headline be?
Oh, this is a great question, and this would help me with the future visualization. I often I think about being the kind of grandmother of a certain field of art. So there's definitely pioneers in the art field that are my predecessors, in the bioart field that are my predecessors. But I think about being actually to be able to make developments that can actually heal and enhance us, beyond just art, to actually go into mind-body medicine and the biomedical field as well. But in that, there's a larger picture of not just making the accomplishments with the work, but with how I work. And I'm hoping to really set a positive example for women's empowerment and self-empowerment too, to be able to realize that we can focus on who we want to become and work towards that, even when it seems like it's against the odds.
Are you, would you say you're optimistic, pessimistic, or neutralistic? That's my word, neutralistic.
I'm pretty optimistic, but I try to take a relative view. So I actually have a degree in philosophy and relativism.
I'm gonna say so many artists thrive on drama and depression, because for the artists it is the dystopia that brings out their art. Are you one of those kind of artists, or you're optimistic?
So I think I was. It's been a personal challenge. But part of my growth, part of my emotional growth and emotional maturity has been in understanding how to accept paths of peace and grow in those means that that struggle and suffering is not the only way to make in big developments or big spiritual advances, that there's other paths as well. And I find that when I compare that to women's empowerment and decisions that I've had to make in the workforce, it's not always about just powering through something. Sometimes that's the case. Like, how do I empower myself in this situation? How do I work towards what I want? How do I power through it? But sometimes it's about selecting this path of peace. And there's a lot of emotional intelligence that goes with these questions as well. So, no, I don't think I'm so driven by suffering anymore. But when we look at suffering in the world, these are big needs that we have to address.
Yes, yes.
So I think I've translated more from internal pain and suffering and my own grievances to understanding a global perspective. But a lot of loss that I've been through, a lot of, things that have happened with birth defect in my body, these things that we go through that really make us question life and question the human condition. I feel like these are fundamental truths that, yes, even though I've experienced this suffering on a personal level, that we can relate to all people, regardless of economic status, regardless of gender or sex, regardless of skin tone, regardless of religion. We all have this fundamental human condition and can relate to each other's humanness and suffering, as well as the joy of life too. So this is the area that I feel like I've transferred some of these struggles from a personal place to understanding empathy for global issues.
I want to ask just one last question.
Yes, please.
Do you think your art has changed since you've become a mother?
It's developed, and not just as my artwork itself, but also as a business person too. So I was really influenced by my own mother. My own mother was a scientist and she did research work. So whenever I do scientific work, I always feel her spirit very present with me. And even in regenerative reliquary that I was talking about before, one of the big conceptual advancements that was made was when I thought about, at one point I was supposed to do testing on this piece, and the scientists suggested we use cancer cells before using stem cells, because if cancer cells couldn't grow on this, then stem cells definitely couldn't. And my immediate response was no way, because my mother passed away from cancer. Then I went home and I thought about it, and I thought, what if I had her cells? What if I could use her cells? And what would that mean if they continued to live on outside of her body even after she's gone? So this started to raise a lot of awareness in my work. And when I was actually influenced to make this piece in a lot of ways because I started doing work with bones when I was pregnant. When I was pregnant, I was thinking about these two cells coming together, two stem cells. I mean, not stem cells, but a lot of stem cells developing in this process. I was thinking about these two cells coming together and forming all these different bones, all these different organs. I was also watching the external changes that were going on with my body, and I was very inspired by this process. So I wanted to learn more about bones. And in hindsight, now I see this full circle. The last time I was making artwork about bones was when my mother was dying. And that was in like 96 to 99. And that was actually my first piece of artwork in a major museum. I'll send over an image so that you can share it with your viewers. And at that time, it was much more about protection and death. But now my work with bones is about life and how are these generative forms made. And I wanted to learn from this intelligence of life, learn from these stem cells and allow them to teach me. So I was very inspired by the process of being pregnant and giving birth. And that's how it showed up in my artwork. I was also very inspired because both of my parents made a big influence on me as, pretty much entrepreneurs forging their own path. My father was a pharmacist. Mm-hmm. And it makes me feel like I need to set a good example for my child and the younger generation as well. So my work has, my self-empowerment and my woman's empowerment, my mother empowerment has definitely increased since I've been a mother. Also, I seem to get so much more done. And I've heard this from other parents too, that somehow they are much better at time management and get more done, even though they have more to do. So I don't know how it all adds up, but it's working for me. So it has definitely impacted me.
Well, folks, we've come to the end of another very interesting conversation.
Can we talk about one more thing? There was one question you had that I really wanted to talk about. I don't think we talked about anything on your list. They were all good questions. But there was one question that you had, I think it was number 2, about the future of work. And where
Yes.
can we talk about that a little bit since we're talking about some work?
Sure. So we can, well, that wasn't the last question, folks. We have one more question. I did have a question which I didn't ask because I kind of got into this other conversation, but the future of work, how does your artwork then and what you've been doing with technology and art and the design of the human future and the idea about the future of work and technology and AI, how is that coming together and how would you think that would affect us as women in society and our role as women in society? How will AI and the future of work affect women's role in society?
So I could talk about a more big picture and I'll talk about my individual work too. But the big picture of what I see coming is we see all different kinds of statistics. We see statistics that the integration of more automation and technology, more AI into the equation will help us be able to produce faster, produce more, it'll create more jobs. Then you see the other side of the research that says that it's going to eliminate jobs. And it depends what area we look at, right? If we look at something like the trucking industry and Teamsters, most likely by 2030 with self-driving vehicles, this is going to be an industry that's super in flux. Fortunately, they have one of the strongest unions, and so and some of the legislation takes time to go through. So as they're working through the legislation, we're also looking for other resources and opportunities for those workers, hopefully. But then we see other areas that these technologies can be used to empower us and help us produce faster. Now, I grew up in the home of IBM. And when I was a kid, we would go on field trips to see people's dads. It was always dads, never moms, that worked there. And we would go into these rooms that had computers. I mean, they were humongous. They were like the size of, they were just huge. There were multiple
rooms, exactly.
And we were told about this future that when we were our age, that the computers would be able to solve all these problems for us. They would be able to do medical tasks. They would be able to solve world hunger. They'd be able to balance economies. And we would be able to all relax and live lives of leisure and let our technology do the work for us. And in one way, we got this right. Our computing power can do all these things now. But we haven't used it towards those ends. So this is where I get concerned about how are we going to stand up for ourselves so that we really use our technology to empower us in the workforce and on all fronts? How can we negotiate for a balance of power between our companies and the demands that they ask of us and the work and the demands they ask of us and the workers' rights? So it's so I really feel like this is a very important area where we really have to look at empowerment, women's empowerment, especially because women are still having struggles in the workforce. I mean, in this day and age, why are we having these problems? So if we can project out to 2030, say, who do we want to become? How do we want to use our technology to empower us? Then that's a really important, those are really important things that we need to contemplate now and start to use our technology towards that future vision. So I hope that I can help paint that future vision through my artwork that I make and also through my personal example of how I work.
Well, I certainly hope that your artwork, and I certainly hope I will see a show in the near future by 2020 on empowerment that will be shown in some of these other places that you have shown before, Ars Electronica in Linz, Austria, or at the solar show, another solar show in San Francisco, California, where you are. And certainly I do hope that magazines such as Discovery Channel, BBC, and others that have shown your work will see this particular show on empowerment as one worthy of also spreading in a way that the world can see more of your work. Thank you so much, Amy Karle, for being such a great conversationalist and helping us think very differently about the future. Folks, I want to thank you for joining us. We have had a really very interesting conversation with Amy Karle, who is a bioartist, an internationally awarded bioartist, whose work, as we said earlier, manages to blend digital, physical, and biological systems into representing what it means to be human at physical and spiritual levels. We have come to the end of a very interesting conversation, but the story continues to be written. And as we look forward to your artwork, we look forward to continue to co-create this future, which is indeed our shared responsibility. Remember, people, that it's better for us to be the parent of our future than the child of our past. So let us go out and co-create our future. And as we say in Jamaica, I urge you to continue to walk good and save journeys. I'm trying to do my Star Trek sign here. Save journeys.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have been listening to Future Sense Now with Dr. Claire Nelson, brought to you by the Futures Forum. For more, please visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Thank you for listening. Spread the word. Share the future.